But the two have very different reputations. I think you would agree that in every respect, Ashoka and Kautilya come across as opposites in terms of their image, in terms of their reputations, in terms of the idea of politics that they represent. Ashoka represents what can be described as the dharma view of politics, though we can discuss whether there is a single dharma view or several. That is open to discussion, but I think he does represent a certain view, ethical view, which we can describe as the dharma view of politics, and Kautilya represents the artha view, where material gain, the pursuit and the acquisition of power, the aggrandizement and politics and political power comes above everything else. Well, there is a very big difference in the place of dharma in their political ideology. For Ashoka, dharma is supreme. In fact, the word dhamma is mentioned over 100 times in his inscriptions, and Ashoka was a man who was possessed with the desire to explain and to propagate and to spread the kind of understanding of dharma or dhamma that he had, not only within his own kingdom, but beyond his kingdom as well. So he really was obsessed with explaining and propagating dhamma. So dhamma is clearly supreme. It's the most important thing for him. And he was so obsessed with dhamma that I'm sure he had very little patience with the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day activities that would have been involved in governing a vast empire. He would have been very impatient with all those things. Kautilya, on the other hand, says, Artha eva pradhana iti Kautilyaha, Artha mulo hi dharma kamaviti. Artha, material well-being, is superior to dharma, and he explains why. Because he explains things. He doesn't just make statements. There is a kind of logical approach to statecraft here. He says, Artha is superior to dharma and kama, or sensual pleasure, because dharma and kama are dependent on it. So although Kautilya occasionally pays lip service to dharma, it's very clear that he is going to look at, in fact, Arthashastra demands that an expert on Arthashastra must look at politics from the point of view of artha. So this is one major difference. Dharma has different position. It's right on top in terms of the, call it purusharthas, or it's on top of the scale of everything for Ashoka, and for Kautilya it is artha. The second difference is in what Dhamma and Dharma are for these two thinkers. So I'm looking at Ashoka as a political thinker, not only as a modern king, because I think there is a political philosophy that is embedded in his inscriptions. And he tells us. We don't have to guess because he tells us not once, but again and again. So for Ashoka, Dhamma, which is the Prakrit form of the Sanskrit Dharma, includes self-control, purity of thought, liberality or generosity, dana, gratitude, firm devotion, truthfulness, and purity. These are some of the virtues that he mentions repeatedly in his edicts, and that's not all. It is a duty-oriented set of ideas. So relations, social relations are extremely important. He tells us that Dhamma also includes obedience to mother and father, respect for elders, courtesy and generosity towards Brahmins and renunciants, Shramanas, courtesy to slaves and servants, which must have been quite revolutionary in the 4th century BCE context, liberality or generosity towards friends, acquaintances, and relatives, moderation in expenditure and possessions, and guarding one's speech. These are things that are stated in Ashoka's inscriptions, where he describes what Dhamma is, where he explains what Dhamma is. And of course, and we'll talk about this some more, Dhamma also includes and attaches this great deal of importance that is attached in Dhamma to non-violence and compassion. In fact, Patrick Olivelle, in his excellent work on Ashok and also the concept of Dharma, has suggested quite convincingly that Ashok, by making Dhamma or Dharma the cornerstone of his political philosophy, by talking about Dhamma in inscriptions all over the subcontinent, that he actually played a very pivotal role in changing, transforming the meaning of the word dharma by injecting ethical content into it. So this is Ashok's Dhamma. It has to do with ethics. It has to do with the cultivation of the self. How does this compare with Kautilya's Dharma? It is very clearly a brahminical perspective. And let me say that, as you well know, Ashok was influenced by Buddhism, but his Dhamma is not identical to the teaching of the Buddha for the laity. There are overlaps. Kautilya's Dharma, on the other hand, is a very clear brahminical perspective. And when he talks about Dharma, he has the Arthashastra model of Dharma in front of him. It is the Dharma of Varnas and the Dharma of Ashramas. I would say Varna Dharma is more important than Ashrama Dharma. However, and that is something I find quite interesting, that although Kautilya is seen as a Brahman or Brahminical ideologue on politics, if you read the text carefully, we find that the interests of the state, the profit of the state, the interests of the state are really central, so much so that when Kautilya has to make a break from Varna Dharma, he does so. So he will say, for instance, that you can recruit Shudras in the army. Okay, that would not be in accordance with what a text like the Manusmriti would say. So he makes breaks, significant breaks with the Brahminical tradition when it is the interests of the state that are involved. There is a difference in the placing of Dharma in the two texts, in the thought of the two thinkers. There is a significant difference in the meaning, the content of Dharma in the thought of the two thinkers. And there is, of course, a significant difference in the place of non-violence in the thought of these thinkers. So if you read the Ashokan edicts, he talks about how daya, compassion, gentleness, self-control, sayyama, abstention from injuring, avihimsa, abstention from killing, analambha, how these are very, very important aspects of Dhamma. And clearly, Ashok comes across as a ruler, as an emperor who was very concerned with mitigating the violence that is inherent or was inherent then in and still is inherent in the social and political spheres. What about Kautilya? Kautilya also talks about violence. He discusses violence of various kinds, but mitigating social violence does not appear to be an overtly central concern for him. It's there, but it's not as important as it is for Ashok. What about the attitude towards the relationship between the king and the praja, the subjects? Ashok does talk about certain welfare measures that he took for the material welfare of his subjects, planting trees, digging wells, providing for medical care, so on and so forth. But it is very clear that he was more concerned with the moral welfare of the people, not only in his own realm, but also beyond his own realm. And the reason why he was concerned, or, you can ask the question, how do we know he really thought this? Did he really believe this? That's another question. But this is what he is telling us. So let us just go with that for the time being. And he says that he's concerned about the moral welfare of his people for their own sake, so that they attain happiness in this life and the next, so that they attain punya, that is merit, and so that they attain swarga, or heaven. What about Kautilya? Quite different. His king is concerned with the material welfare of his subjects. And he is concerned with his subjects' material welfare so as to further his own power and resources. In fact, I think Kautilya's most brilliant intervention in Indian political thought is that he was able to demonstrate that furthering the material welfare of the subjects was in the political and material interests of the king. So he does this through logical reasoning, through explanation. So it's really material welfare that he is concerned with. He's not particularly or not overtly concerned with the kind of moral welfare issues and punya that Ashoka is interested in.